where did I go? I went to prison when I was in my on placement or something, and this woman, chaplain in the prison, she was dressed all in black and really manly. And I remember thinking then, I don't want to be a woman in a man's job, pretending to be a man. You know, I always want to be a woman. And yes, we do it differently. And people will say that, you know, that women do pastoral services different from the way that men do them. But that's because we're different creatures. You know, you can't hide. Well, I can't hide. I can't do it like, you know, him next door, Gary.
Is there any reason, like, do you say specifically how you're different, or just?
I think they never sort of come out with how specific. I think we're just more gentler, really, to be around in that sort of more gentle female way, and caring way, which people pick up on, rather than in the sort of manly, stiff upper lip way. I think that's got something to do with it. And people are still apprehensive if they have not come across a female priest before. They're still quite apprehensive about what's that going to be like, because they've not. And surprisingly, there's still quite a lot of people who say, never come across. You know, don't go to mix in these circles very often. If they only come to weddings and funerals, may not have come across. And there's still people I come across, people say, never seen a female vicar before, but you know, it's all right. You know, they go very surprised. It's all right. And people do react differently to you, and I think they do to a woman than they do to a man. Which is just a show because we've only been ordained for 20 years. So it's, you know, women have only been ordained for 20 years, 21 years. So it's still new in evolutionary terms.
Yeah. Do you get much, like, negative reception?
Yeah. There's still people that will not take communion from a woman. I had, this time last year, I took a funeral. No, I was supposed to take a funeral because it happened at this church, and I had a huge barney with the undertaker. And because he had told me that a dear friend of the family was one of my colleagues, my male colleagues in the deanery. And when I spoke to Colin, he said, I've only met the family once, you know, I don't know what all this is about. So I went and challenged the undertaker, who sort of had tried to organise his funeral without my say-so. And he doesn't like being challenged by women. He doesn't like women in leadership. So all my colleagues have problems with him. And so I went to see the family to try and find out what was going on, because I knew the family, because I knew all the daughters of the lady who had died, because I worked with them at school and I know all the grandchildren. And I said, what's going on? And they said, oh, mother, like mum, male doctors, you know, proper jobs, men. But actually it turned out it was an aunt or a dear friend of the woman who had died, who had said, oh, remember, your mum didn't like women in men's roles. And so this aunt had, or this friend of mother's had sort of persuaded these girls that I couldn't take the funeral. And so it had become really complicated, whereas they come to me and said, look, this is the situation, would you mind? I probably would have quite happily shared the service with a male colleague, but at that point it got very messy. But I had to work quite hard to keep, you know, my relationship with the girls all above board, because the undertaker interfered basically. But yes, it does happen. You still get people who object to who object to women actually being in this role.
Mm.
You know, whereas they probably wouldn't object to a female pilot or a female surgeon or a female.
No. Why do you think it is a big deal to some people that women take, like, you know, are in the church? Why do you think people believe that it is a man's role?
Well, some will interpret it theologically, saying, you know, well, God is a man, and that's only because we, the way the scriptures are translated, we have a gender, what do you call it? There's a gender differentiation in our language, you know, so a he or her. You can't be neutral.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, if I'm right, Hebrew is less defined in that way. So the Bible itself. So when it was translated, they just decided that God is father rather than parent. You know, and Jesus is his son rather than his child. It's sort of lost in translation. And then there are those bits in scripture that say, you know, women should remain silent in church. It's those interpretations from scriptures that bring us to this place where they say women should not. And it's historical, of course, but at the beginning of when the church first started, women were in leadership. That's how the church was founded. Although Jesus had 12 disciples, male disciples, it wouldn't have been acceptable in society for women to be his closest friends, you know, in a platonic sort of way. But he had a lot of women followers, and those women went on to lead the churches. So those names that we don't understand in the book of Romans and the book of Acts and all that, a lot of those are female names, but we sort of interpret them as being, oh, must be a bloke, can't be anything else. So yeah, you know, they sort of come on, that's how they argue it out, you know. And then there is, I think it's in Corinthians or Timothy or somewhere, saying, you know, women should remain silent in church. And there's those who really insist on that's what we should do. We'll squeeze around it. We're saying, well, women can teach Sunday school, but they can't stand up front in church, or women are allowed to lead a women's prayer group, but not a mixed group. All sorts of peculiar things like that. But that's probably the main, and it's just a prejudice. It's just, for some it's just, you know, well, that's how it's always been. They haven't really thought about it, but that's how it's always been to them. So.
What about for you? Like, you've been to male-led services and female-led services. Do you even notice a difference, or?
Not anymore.
No.
No, not at all.
It's just a person.
It's just a person, and some will, I think, you know, you react to people, don't you, when you are sitting, say, in the congregation or an audience, you react to someone and think, yeah, they're doing a good job, or, you know, could do a better job. And I think that's how I now react, and not thinking, oh, she's doing a rubbish job because she's a woman or he's a man. It's just someone fulfilling their calling, which is what it is, you know. God calls us to these places, and I don't think that I react to anyone because they're a man or a woman. It's just because I think, well, I could do a better job or a worse job, or that's great. So yeah. But that's, 10 years of living in a mixed economy for me. So the average congregation has whoever they have in front of them for a number of years. They don't, well, some have more than one, but this congregation has historically just had a vicar and not much else. So whoever was here, that's who they had. But yeah, whenever first come here, I was quite a novelty. Still am, I think.
Yeah. Novelty. I can't think of anything else to ask. I don't think what people are intrigued by. What do you say people are most interested in? Like, is you being female and vicar? Is there anything that people ask you all the time about your job, or anything that they're always surprised by, or I know you said the pastoral side, but
There's a pastoral side. I think other women are amazed by how they say, "Oh, you've got a family?" Yes. And that you actually are also a pastor to your family, you know, to your children. And now they say, "Oh, how are your parents?" And the knowledge that the expectation is that I will look after my parents more so than Fergus. My brother was expected to look after our parents, and they're sort of quite amazed that you can sort of juggle all these
look
balls.
after everybody.
Whereas it's not there for a male. The expectation of society is that the man can just carry on with his job. That if he or she's got, you know, the wife does all the childcare, and his sisters will care for parents, and our society is still quite geared in that way. It's quite surprising until you find your sort of self in the midst of it all. And you think, oh no, it's not like that at all. There is an expectation in society. You know, there's definitely women's roles and men's roles, and the caring roles, i.e. caring for the children, is really seen as the woman's job, and caring for elderly parents or other relatives is seen as the woman's role. So the older women here say, how do you do it all? And they say, well, the children are grown up and all this kind of stuff. Whereas I don't think that they would ever say that to a man, you know, unless the man was maybe a widow or whatever and had to look after his own children. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that's really come apparent to me is that our role as women is still seen mainly as the carers in society. And you know, there is always a flip side in that, but the general expectation is that the women do the caring role, and that's what the older women in the congregation find sort of, gosh, you know, how you do it all.
So do you think that people, because you're a woman, they come to church and they think, oh, you give more of a caring side, whereas if you were a man, they might not come to you emotionally as much? Or do you think it's probably quite equal?
I don't know, because I've not...
Obviously, you've not been a man and experienced something.
I've not been a man and not experienced that. And I still think it's what kind of person you are, who you like unburdening yourself to. But bizarre things which are now sort of coming. I think after 4 years people have got used to it, but when I first got here, I was expected to be the vicar's wife and the vicar. You know, so don't come to me and say, you're going to bake a cake for whatever, and I go, no. Or will you, you know, that sort of role reversal they couldn't cope with in our family. So Dad being the spouse and me being the vicar. And there's always children running around the graveyard. If they come in, we'll smile at them. but like because children don't bother me, as you well know, so I will have quite happily loads of kids in this church, and I've a carpet I roll out and put down, say at a christening or in a family service, and say, come on, you can all be here. And everybody always says, oh, you're so good with children. But I think, again, because the children don't bother me, so then they don't bother the adults so much, because they don't have to remain silent. And you can, again, see that sort of, yeah, she's good with children. But actually, that was my first calling. You know, it's not, I was a nursery nurse in my first profession, so yeah, I should be good with children, really.
Yeah.
And I think that would be the same, say, if Tom ever ended up in a role as you know, because he's good with children, because he's a teacher, you know, it's in his nature.
Yeah.
I'm sure that if he ended up, he would know how to cope with a room full of kids. But yeah, people do stereotype. Yeah.
Interesting.
It is quite fascinating. It is quite fascinating. And I think it's quite fascinating how we, you know, I ended up in this parish. Because I don't think if I'd had a full interview that we would have got through. Morning!
Yeah.